Not that I think it's
Good evening. I'm waiting for the other bus to come in. I was just telling Gail I wish I had a voting machine here. This would be a good time to get a vote out. If we look at 15 years ago, the plan that Jean is going to show you this evening would have been a fantastic plan. Absolutely fantastic. 10 years ago, it would have been a good plan. Today, it's a critical plan. And it's something that we just can't avoid. It's something that we need. It's a necessity that we face every day that it makes it more difficult to instruct and put across our instructional program. But it's my pleasure to introduce Jean Perrin, who's responsible for this packet and much more. Jean, good evening.
Thank you.
The audience is yours.
Right, yeah. As Paul said, I'm Jean Perrin. I'm a senior principal with SSP Architects. And we were hired by the district to help them through a long-range facilities master plan, as well as to take the next steps towards implementing kind of top priorities and recommendations through some submissions to the Department of Education. What I want to do with the Overcrowding Taskforce Committee is really kind of bring you up to speed as to what has been done in the past couple months. When I last presented to you, we were just embarking on the master plan process. So a lot of what I talked about was the process and our early preliminary findings. And you're going to see tonight, I'm really going to start with some slides that some of you that were here before have seen before in terms of the background information, make sure that everybody's still starting on that same page of understanding, and then really show you the next tier, the kind of the highlights from the master plan process itself. And so from that perspective, the areas of focus, the demographic findings, and the facilities overview, that's what we kind of talked about the last time I was here. And now it's all about capacity, because we had measurements of capacity, we had assessments of capacities, and we're able to put them in kind of buckets and figuring out what is the most top tier immediate areas of need, what's the highest priority in terms of substandard conditions and or overcrowding potential, what is what I'm calling the next tier batch of priorities, and the long-range batch of priorities. What the Board of Education has to do is kind of figure out what they want to do for their first action, their first steps. Obviously, in a master plan, you can't do everything all at once. It's impossible. It's too big, too broad, too much. But that's one reason why we went after priorities and the idea of really trying to do some measurements to help guide the Board of Education, their decision-making in terms of what they put forward. And so we have our guideline recommendations as to what are the universal components that we're trying to achieve with any kind of action plan, as well as some big picture components for the both what we're saying are the proposals, the big picture, as well as the timeline big picture. That's kind of what we're going to do. Again, starting with capacity needs, we knew that walking in. That's why we were hired, was to say, take a look at our capacity needs. We know we're overcrowded. We know we have trailers. We know we have very high class size. Some schools more than others. We want to get our handle on who's the most overcrowded, where do we have the biggest problems. We also talked about safety and security and access at all the schools. In a master plan, you look at every single school and every single site because every school can be improved. And so what we want to do in a master plan is document that. So even projects that become capital improvements, things that are folded in annually as part of regular maintenance or upkeep or regular improvements, that's part of the master plan, and that's part of what goes down to the state for the general implementation, let alone the things that you do to build new capacity, either through renovations or additions into it. At the same time we're looking at it saying this has to be relevant for the 21st century, both in terms of the type of education that's happening, plus all the curriculum changes that have happened over the past 10 years with the Department of Education and what they require for now for self-contained special education support. There's a whole different requirements at the high school level in terms of added increase in terms of how many years of science and other components that students now have to take to graduate. The bar has been raised by the Department of Education all across all the grade levels, and that's what these schools have to accommodate on the educational side. And so we wanted to also take a look at those other spaces that really support that broad curriculum, whether it's music, art, the multi-purpose spaces, the general functionality of the schools, in addition to pure capacity. And then the last bucket is something that we always have to do with facilities, is take a look at the infrastructure. How are the roofs? How are the floors? How are the finishes? How are the HVAC? How are those components working? Electrical support for it, and what ways can we make the school as efficient in operations as possible, so more money can go, less for fuel bills and more for the education, and what some strategies are for that. And this really kind of, again, that area of focus was that capacity, that these things that really translated. But the special focus for us was to take a look at every single school and even consider things like grade reconfiguration. Would that help or hurt the district? So there was other components we put in the focus in terms of looking at the functionality of it. The demographic findings, I think you've had previous presentations by George Sundell of Sundance Associates. He is the district's demographer. And all I've put up here is like a list of some of the highlights that are in his big report that he went. And he really kind of captured some of the trends that have just recently happened in the district, as well as he really signaled how this is a turning point for the district in terms of what's happening and where the students are. So his point was, that birth rates are declining, so that's really going to have a dampening effect at the elementary. But kids are already in the school system, and that's obviously hitting at the middle and the high school levels and will continue over the next 10 years as you have the kindergarten class moving on up through the high schools over that time period. But at the same time, he's indicating that from the 2008 recession, when housing starts and permits were really low, it's back on the board. So things are still happening with development, with immigration, with other things, with a kind of densifying. And we saw that pattern in some of the schools that are basically kind of still getting students in, even though the birth rate's low, but they're still absorbing more students. And so we have some other little trends that are happening within the district. And his point, and this is from the demographer, let alone from our assessment, is that he acknowledged that in the next 5 years, because that's what we plan for when we go down with the state, we can look ahead to 10 years, but we plan for the 5 years, is that in 5 years, the elementary enrollments will essentially be slightly exceeding capacity. It'll be fairly even. That's assuming half-day kindergarten stays in place, because if you go to full-day kindergarten, you need more classrooms. But that was his assumption. We took a look at it differently from the facilities. But he acknowledged that the middle schools will be significantly exceeding their capacity, and the high schools will be, I don't know what you want to call it, super exceeding, severely exceeding, but really at the level that if you don't do anything at the high schools, there is nothing that could be done short of double sessions. In other words, there's no other space that could be pressed into service for general classrooms and absorbing the students without a net increase or growth at those both high school capacities. And in particular, J.P. Stevens is already there. They already have absorbed in mass, so they really have the super point of severe overcrowding. And Edison High School is essentially starting it, so it will really kind of be absorbing its plus 400 kids over the next 5 to 10 years. This is a graph of what's happened. This is how you, as Paul indicated, in talking about planning, 10 years ago would have been really helpful because it would have captured a lot of the increase that happened that really and primarily hit at the elementary level. That's that steep curve. What's happening now is a more gentle curve, so it is flattening out. But we still have to deal with those students that came in here that have not been dealt with in terms of additional facilities. They've just been going into classrooms and crowding out, as well as the increase in the special education population. That's actually increasing. Despite birth rate decreasing, that population is increasing in terms of classifications and needs, and the need for, that corresponds with added classrooms that are required. This is by law. You have to educate every student that enters the district, and that's really adding to that what's happening at the elementary level in particular for that fighting for capacity. And this bar graph just starts to show exactly where the population is heading. You can see that it's going to be peaking in the next 5 years really at the middle schools, and then this kind of graph is going to essentially move to the high schools. So right now that's really the shift of it. This is capturing a moment in time, but that's that peak that's rolling through all the schools and the districts with it. Good thing to have projections and have a demographer. The question is, what if he's wrong? What if the projections are not happening? One of the things that we do is we look at the projected trends and see if we see patterns of confirmation. So just taking a look at the most current numbers, the 2018, 2019 numbers, we are kind of seeing that trend that was projected by the demographer actually happening. So what's happening, the confirmation that we saw just looking at between the January 2018 and the October 2018 enrollments is that the enrollment decreased slightly, 106 students across all the schools, all 11 schools. At the elementary level, where the middle school increased over 216 over that same time period, and the high school is just starting its bigger increase. It's at 77, but you can see that bulge of 200 plus kids is going to be moving to the high school to add pressure at that facility. The other projected trend with the special education, you can see again that their needs are expanding despite a decreasing in the birth rate, and that was confirmed in the population. As you can see that right now special education is requiring over 60 classrooms, because of the need and the classification. And this is good because it's good for the district to basically educate its special needs students in the district. It's really much more cost effective than sending them elsewhere and busing them to another district, which you have to do if you don't do it in-house. So this is actually a very positive step for having these programs in the schools and doing it in a very cost-effective, efficient. They're with their neighborhood kids and friends, so it's actually a really positive development for special education. So I'm not saying that this is bad. It's just something we have to acknowledge in terms of the facility impact with it. And even what classrooms get assigned for special education. A lot of times you need a toilet with it because it really makes a big difference in the program and with the students' needs, where there are very few classrooms at the elementary level that have those toilets, and a lot of them are the kindergarten. So you have double duty in which the kindergarten rooms want to serve a real full big kindergarten class, but at the same time it has a toilet which really can be needed for the special education population, even if that class size is very small. So there's a little bit of tension of who gets what, and so the district has been very proactive in terms of adding capacity at FDR. That's going to be coming on next year because they acknowledge that really moving some of those kids out of what are being used as kind of, classrooms that are larger than they need into rooms that are appropriately sized and have the toilet facilities and have the support at the on-site. In terms of other facility side findings that we've had, again, we've seen the limitations of when you're using every square inch of space, when some of the schools have gotten very, very large in elementary, but only have one multi-purpose room, the overcrowding that's happening. Storage and other components have been pressed into service for small group instruction, so there's a lack of storage, copy support rooms. You have an image of actually school lunches being served in the corridor, which is very difficult to really manage and involves a lot of lost time, let alone the kind of managed chaos that happens on a daily basis with the lunch programs. And then in some of the schools have older style classrooms that are limited in their square foot size, and they're jam-packed. When you have a class size that's going up 27, 28, 29, 30, in some cases over 30, there's no room to do any projects or for kids to move around. They're really landlocked into a kind of set lecture mode because there is no extra space, and you have that in several of the schools that are severely overcrowded, that kind of locking of it. We took a look at not only the classrooms, but also the sites themselves to see what else could be improved. So that's in the master plan in terms of ways to improve that security, the access, the circulation on site. A lot of schools can really benefit from that kind of attention across the site. And then also in terms of just the infrastructure. Again, this is in a long-range master plan. There's a lot of data entry that goes with this, and so we'll have components that talk about not only the additional spacing for capacity and security upgrades, but really HVAC upgrades, the site improvements, the multi-purpose room improvements, all these other components. And this is true for every single school. Toilet renovations across the board, the field work, some stormwater management, mitigation. There's a lot of wet sites in the district. So all that is going to be entered as data within the long-range master plan itself. This is just your schools. And just to remind you that you have, across the whole district, you have 19 schools when you count the early childhood centers, with 9 of them being on the north side and 10 being on the south side. You have a couple shared campuses, and that's why you have 9 schools on 7 sites in one and 10 schools on 9 sites on the other. But it's fairly balanced, although you do see that some of the older schools with the more limited sites are actually in the south, where some of the north ones were just, when they were purchased originally, they had larger sites and larger components with it. And here's I'm going to start with our top tier. And the top tier out of all the schools is Wilson Middle School. It's experiencing its peak capacity enrollment needs right now. It's already entered that, in which literally starting in the fall with another 100 kids coming, it's just like out of space. There's no more classrooms, there's nothing else to do. And so the idea was to kind of treat the school a little differently to try and get some emergent relief in it. The idea of doing a modular addition as quickly as possible. And this was really recommended to the board that they take action at Wilson Middle School just to keep it functioning within its catchment area of keeping the kids assigned to that school, going to it, and having sufficient classrooms. So that's really almost in a class by itself, because that's really where the need is at this moment in time in terms of having the top priority of really not having sufficient space, and it's really going into that peak years right now. If we wait 3 years for referendum to be passed and things to be built, it's almost too late for the school. It would have suffered severely during that time period. So we're trying to find a way to find relief for this school in the short term, as short a term as possible. And that's with the target of trying to get something online in the 2019-2020 school year, just to give it that component. And there's backup plans. We're going to be doing some interior renovation of trying to take some classrooms, subdivide it, try to gain some additional spaces within the school, as well as even a backup plan that perhaps the media center has to be pressed into service for classroom on a temporary basis if the other things aren't built in time for the capacity. Then what I'm calling my high priority bucket, that really is led by looking at the two high schools, both Edison and J.P. Stevens, because J.P. Stevens right now has a deficit of over close to 500 students that it really doesn't have sufficient seats for it, which is why the high class size, which is why the rooms are being pressed into service practically 12 periods out of the 12 periods that it's being used. There's no fat in that school, and there's a lot of congestion in some areas of it. And it's going to get another 500 kids added onto it. So it's net deficit when you project out. As you can see, it's close to 1,000 students, 1,000 seats, based on how it currently is arranged right now. So that really, particularly, is leading the pack. And at Edison, you can see, while its current operational deficit is just starting to feel the pinch, 70, which you can absorb here and there, but you can see within a very short time it's gaining another 300 kids, and then ultimately another 100 on top of that. So you'll have a deficit of over 400 at Edison. So it will also run out of those classroom spaces and not have sufficient space. Then we also took a look at the elementaries and the middle schools, in particular the ones that have trailers, because one of the recommendations of the plan was to get kids out of detached trailers, classroom trailers, and get them back into the school as all possible. That was one of the guiding goals that we had for that. And so the schools that are currently here all have trailers at them. So part of it, we're looking at, okay, let's take a special look at the schools that have trailers. Some have four trailer classrooms. Some have two. Adams has a double. And so we wanted to take a look at that and say that these classrooms, even if enrollment in them starts to level off, they do not have enough capacity at all. Even as if enrollment just starts to slow up, they're still behind the curve because they went through that steep curve with no relief. And so what this idea was to restore equilibrium, restore the fact that they could go back to having an art and a music room, and really give them a full curriculum on a permanent basis for those. And so the ones that we really highlighted was Madison. The intermediate school at Madison is really significantly overcrowded as an elementary, as well as Lincoln is significantly overcrowded, and Marshall. Those are the three elementary schools. And then the other school that we signaled that has trailers and that really is facing that middle school crunch is the other school on the north side, which is Adams. And that really has kind of a net deficit. We were just programming it today of really kind of 9 teaching stations that would really complete the school and kind of bring it into a capacity balance. And so that's what with these little diagrams, these little thumbprints. We have bigger diagrams and we have to go to the level of kind of programming. But in this case, the purple shows you where new additions are being planned. So that's like the net growth of the component. And the tan color is the existing school. And you can see for J.P. Stevens at the top, We're looking at kind of an infill construction, kind of putting a small piece of purple in there, but it's significant because it's actually all science labs going next to the existing science labs. So they're really right now pressing classrooms into use as for science because they don't have sufficient number of labs. And that's significant because without sufficient number of labs, you basically will have to cut off providing students access to science. And this is what you're trying to promote. This is where you're trying to say, no, we want people doing STEM or STEAM. We want people to be able to take 4 years of science, to be doing the hands-on component with it, the exploration. This is really the educated workforce of the future. You don't want science, the lack of a science lab to be the constraining mode of educating students. With Adams Middle School, we have 2 little pieces of purple. One is a 2-story component that would really kind of finish up the 2-story component that would add that 9 teaching stations. And there's a little bit of purple in the front that really is adding another teaching station to the existing gymnasium. Because right now they have a 2-station gym and they really desperately need 3 stations because that's how many kids they have. They have over 100 kids having gym on any period. And it really is not working in the 2 stations. They really need a relief of a 3rd station to make it work. And for Madison, the intermediate school, that has super high class sizes for elementary, which is always something that really flags attention from the state. While they're doing well and they're doing it as efficiently as possible, the idea is to take the classrooms offline that are in trailers as well as to try and get the class sizes down to what the state recommends those guidelines are. And that's adding an addition in the back. It looks really big relative to the school, but remember, this is just an elementary 1-story school, so this would be a 1-story addition. And the big box would really be that other multi-purpose room, because right now it's trying to do everything in one tiny, it's like one of the smallest multi-purpose rooms that are in the district with among the largest number of students. So the idea is to add a full gym component with it, as well as some core support for it. And on the south side, we have Edison High School, and this was also looking at kind of strategic placement of some additions. One with being an addition towards the back that would also include some science labs as well as a gymnasium. At Edison High School, its original gym is relatively small, especially in comparison to J.P. Stevens. So the idea is to give it a new main gym and to make the existing gym kind of their second gym. The new main gym would give not only for the PE classes that extra room, but basically it adds to the functionality of a high school because you're able to have, when he's having assemblies, he basically has a bleacher capacity to have school assemblies, and not like what he has now. He has very limited amount of bleachers and really can't serve the whole school. So the idea is to give it a main gym. And in the front, we're looking to sandwich a 2-story addition that would include kind of some new components in the front for the entrance to the school, but also do a really efficient classroom addition in the front that would give it a added capacity, as well as kind of relocate the media center into the front there component. Lincoln School, that's also a 1-story school, so that's a 1-story addition, and we're really kind of completing the donut of the school. It has like these fingers of, it's like a backwards E kind of out, and the idea is to give it its multi-purpose room and then complete the wings that have the kindergarten rooms, complete the wings that have the primary education, and also get some, has 4 trailers right now that are currently being used for self-contained special education, and some will be pressed into service starting next year for kindergarten and for other classroom needs, is to basically take them offline and get them into the school in a permanent way. And Marshall is a very similar component in that you're looking to add just classrooms to finish out so that it could be really a K through 5 school that can carry its capacity target for it, and to take its current cadre of trailers offline and actually expand the parking lot out in that area where the current trailers are for it. I just wanted to touch on, just to give you the full picture, is that those are the ones we're concentrating on as the top tier, as that component of really taking action on. But there are other identified needs as well as benefits that would happen across the board. So I just wanted to quickly kind of give you an overview of what else we looked at when we're looking at the long-range facility planning. So we took a look at a couple of other schools that really would have some significant benefits from targeted additions, mostly for functionality as well as a bit of it for added capacity. And that includes Martin Luther King, Madison Primary, Ben Franklin, and Washington School. And on the north side with Martin Luther King, that school is a big school, and it has one multi-purpose room. So it would primarily really benefit from two things. One is some expanded parking and loop and access for parents, as well as having a multi-purpose room gymnasium added onto it to complete its component. The Madison Primary, the reason why we're proposing an addition is that if it goes to full-day kindergarten, you're going to need more net number of classrooms, and we can add nicely 4 more kindergarten classrooms onto that school, which then really allows to have that extra capacity. So that's really a kindergarten. If you're going to full-day kindergarten, that's a proposed addition for full-day kindergarten. And with that, we would add a multi-purpose cafeteria area so that the main space that it has can remain as a gym. We'd have a multi-purpose cafeteria, and we'd have a little satellite kitchen serving it, because right now what they call a kitchen is really just a storeroom that is totally, not, I won't say illegal, because it's not illegal, but it really is way undersized and completely inadequate for what it's servicing for the school. Because functionally the school does not have a cafeteria or any kind of serving area in its ability to do that. But when you go to full-day kindergarten, you will need that, because before you can have a half-day program and a lot of kids are gone and you're not feeding them. Now you're going to be feeding them. So that really gets heightened attention for that change in usage of it. With Ben Franklin and Washington schools, both schools, again, would also benefit by having a multi-purpose room gymnasium added to them. And in particular at Ben Franklin, there's an opportunity to add some targeted self-contained special education. So this would be a nice, for the schools that are overcrowded and that really can't basically continue or hold on to its special education classrooms, being able to have students go to Ben Franklin and be part of a specialized wing that could include a lot of support facilities for them, small group instruction, in OT, PT, small group instruction room. That's a benefit that is proposed. Again, it's the next tier, but it's something that Ben Franklin's site can handle very well and would be an added benefit. And with Washington, the main thing there is, in addition to the multi-purpose room, is providing a better main entrance office support, because its office nurse is severely undersized and really inadequate. And so the idea is to really shift that at Washington long range. Then long range priorities, we're kind of picking up the rest of the schools. Some of these schools have had additions recently, including Monroe being a brand new rebuilt schools. So that's why they're long range. They're kind of schools that either their population is staying completely stable, not adding pressure to the school, and or they've recently had their second multi-purpose room added and they've had their additions. So that's why they fall into that catchment area. And that's true for Woodbrook. It really had this most recent, the idea is kind of stabilize this population. Any change to that would just be an interior renovation where you can kind of, perhaps get 2 more classrooms created out of existing space when needed. You don't need it until a class section is needed, but we pointed out a few interior renovations that can happen very simply in Woodbrook. Menlo Park, the same thing. Right now you have classroom capacity in there to absorb more students. You have the second multi-purpose room built, but we're showing on the master plan an area where if 2 classrooms are needed, whether it's self-contained or anything in the future, there is a place in Menlo that we can add that without really doing much work to do it. So it's something that the master plan can show the way for the future. Lindenau is a school that does not have much space for any kind of addition. We're just really, and its population is fairly stable, and it's not projected to really increase. So the whole idea here was to just do a courtyard infill to give security at the entrance, as well as to look at a way potentially to have kind of a better site drop-off and more secure. We are recommending that you take the kids playing in the front of the school, literally on the edge of the street, and put them elsewhere on the site. So we have that kind of switch. So that's really kind of site improvements with some minor upgrades with it. James Monroe is just, it's brand new and it's just perking along, and the idea is showing how it can be used to its fullest capacity within that component. And the 2 middle schools, Jefferson and Hoover, both of them can have targeted increases which would help their functionality. They're not being triggered, unlike the 2 schools in the north that have the kids that are already crowding and having the super high class sizes. these two schools are pretty much operating, with some capacity to spare, so can ride that wave a little bit better than their northern points. But Jefferson in particular, there's a way that where the two trailers are in there right now, those kids could be moved into the school, and actually you could add a 1-story, 6-classroom modular addition that complements what's there currently and connect that in and have that be a functioning, as well as the only other big need that was cited was this main office, and really kind of relocate the main office into much better facilities, because that's in the oldest part of the building, very tight, and even the circulation with the corridor, there is no lobby to that school. You just enter into a very narrow corridor, and you have the office right there with no way to really control the access, as well as to really have any kind of breathing room for a lobby. And so the idea was to make that improvement. With Hoover, we identified a couple areas that can improve both service-wise on the bottom with kind of what's happening with their kitchen and access with that, as well as a place to get 2 classrooms that could be added over time. We looked long range at, can be additions and functions that can happen in Hoover long range, but its site improvements would be best served by really kind of rethinking the circulation and the access, and maybe trying to work out a better arrangement of having through circulation, if that can be worked out with the township. We talked about that may be in the books long range for when improvements are happening at that end of the town in terms of the roadways with the township, is taking advantage of that at Hoover and having an improvement with that component with it. And so just to summarize, what we were trying to do, it was just like deal with the most severe overcrowding, which is the Wilson, really anticipate and really have good plans for expanding the 2 high schools. That was really the next trigger point. And then the whole idea is, what can we do at the elementaries and the middle schools that does a couple things, that takes off those trailers, that supports full-day kindergarten, as well as the need for where special education really wants to go within the overall district. And the same thing with the with our goals. And you can see this red line is just right now where the line is being drawn, but that is something that that's a board decision as to where you draw the line for the first phase of action plan versus what happens in the future. And the whole idea is to be able to lay all this information out and all these needs, priorities, goals, and recommendations in terms of what the improvements can look like in the future, and to have it be part of the discussions with the board. We did explore some other alternatives. I just wanted to mention that, because one of the things, how do we know this is the right plan? The only way you can know this is the right plan is if you explore other options and test it and compare it, look at it both from a cost impact potential, as well as the idea of what could happen functionally, what can happen operationally, what would happen in terms of an impact on moving students around to different schools or having redistricting be part of it. But we took a look at that to see if there was any ways to enhance that. So one scenario was this idea of potentially looking at a north side and a south side support for that full-day kindergarten as well as early education. So when we looked at ways, do we look for an kindergarten center as a way to concentrate where the kindergarten kids might go in both the north and the south? That was looked at as one of the scenarios. What we did is we backed away from that. The feeling was that keeping the kindergartens as part of that more neighborhood sending, as part of the stable structure of a K-5 elementary, was actually in the students' best interest. Fewer moves, less of the transportation. And so while the kindergarten center can work in terms of that support, really where the concentration of the early intervention might go might really be tackled at the earliest age in terms of the pre-K population, where you can really flood them with support. And so what we're really looking is hub supports, and particularly for the self-contained education as well as the pre-K in both the north and the south. For the north, it's already at FDR. I mean, that campus has already pledged to be expanded, and we show in the master plan a way to continuous expansion in terms of, you can see another purple being added on to that building over time. So it's a way, and we were talking literally tonight about the idea of having to have a separate access to it, separate parking, separate turnaround. So to take the load of traffic that's currently on a 3-school site and try to have that earliest component be its own entity that really can function independently, which seems to be on paper doable. It requires partnerships with the township and some changes, but the idea is that you have the land and the potential for that really working out well. And obviously, added capacity at the kindergarten level at Madison Primary adds to that campus of really having an early intervention, an early hub at that north side. And on the south side, we looked at a couple different scenarios with the schools, but in particular, Ben Franklin was one that stood out in terms of what could be added on in terms of some early intervention, as well as really kind of, we also looked at things that will happen eventually when you have capacity with Washington and things like that. So there's some other components in the south side that can work towards that. Over long range, we even took a look at that really tiny 4-classroom Edison Early Learning Center that you have down there, and we said eventually it's really inefficient to run a little school for 4 on the edge of a high school that really you don't want to really mix the two in the populations that pick up and drop off. So we're saying long range, it's better to disperse those kids in other schools over time, and when you can convert that into a district building. So whether it's administration or support or other components, we just wanted to say the life of that building as just an early center, because you really can't add to it. It's landlocked, it's impossible to do any improvements to it, and it really adds congestion and almost confusion at times at a high school site. So long range, I'm not saying you close that anytime soon. You still need the classrooms, and the classrooms are functioning well, but that's really kind of an inefficient use of a building like that on a high school site. So that's the long range recommendation. The other big alternative that we looked at, we said, is what if we looked at grade restructuring? Would that help? If we wanted to get full-day kindergarten, what if we took the 5th grade out of the elementaries, which would mean immediately you have classrooms, and put them at the middle schools, and then expand all 4 middle schools? Well, we found that 2 of the middle schools, they have the land. They can be expanded easily. 2 of the middle schools cannot be. So it was really overtaxing, and particularly Hoover and Wilson just really do not have the wherewithal to absorb hundreds and hundreds of more students, because that's what the 5th grade would do. It would be bringing 200, 300, 400 kids to another site that they're already big schools. So after looking at it and looking at the cost of it and looking at the number of classrooms, it actually is more than the plan that we have, which is keeping the existing structure and just adding incrementally at the schools that we're targeting. So it ended up being economically not feasible, as well as you can imagine the disruption to the educational delivery that would happen with any kind of grade reconfiguration. You don't go into it lightly unless you really have a real benefit out of it. And we're saying there is no benefit from it from the facility side of it. And certainly there's a lot of big negatives for redistricting and changing the grade configuration. Because all those schools at the middle school would have to be really run as a school within a school. You basically would have to pair the 5th and 6th grade together and the 7th and 8th grade and really try to keep 2 populations separate. And it's just almost impossible to do it unless we were new construction. New construction, we can design something that would work. But when you're trying to retrofit existing facilities, it just was not really going in that direction very, very successfully for it. So I just want to give you a few images of just the big picture actions, just to give you a little bit of fleshing out what I mentioned. And so you can see the purple here is really the 1-story modular classroom unit that's being proposed for Wilson in the short term. We kind of worked with the school principal to figure out a spot where it could go without disrupting too much of the parking. We are looking to add the dark part of in the gray area, that brownish color is really some net addition to the parking, so that as we're displacing some parking in the back, we basically are working with getting it in the front area. And then this is the immediate relief, as well as the areas highlighted in yellow would be areas that we would touch to try and claim idea of taking 2 large rooms and subdividing them to get 4 classrooms out of it, so a net gain of 2, taking what is currently shower areas in the locker rooms, cleaning that out, getting new lighting, doing everything, and trying and getting a new door from the corridor, but basically making a teaching station out of what is really just kind of an underutilized area within the building. That's another net gain of 1. And then we even highlighted the media center as kind of that back pocket component as need be. It'll be continue to use as a media center. It wants to be a media center, but we have that in the back pocket for functional use if needed. And we just had our programming meeting this past last week for our J.P. Stevens. So Gail, the principal, knows that this plan is in flux because we had a really good discussion. This is like a simple diagram. It shows you approximately the location of where we're looking to add in those two purple areas, but the shape of it's going to change because that's what you do when you go to the next step with the Department of Education submissions. You take this plan, you blow it up to a real scale, you start doing furniture layouts, you kind of work out all the kinks of it. You can take a look at the measurements are very precise now. It's up to a scale. This is still just a diagram. This is really a bubble diagram. But we'd be looking at primarily, again, you can see it's a lot of purple, a lot of capacity being added. And one of the most current thinking is to go actually to do a very super concentrated wing in terms of classroom and actually go 3 stories and do a 3-story classroom component and get a lot of capacity of the classrooms in part of the new construction, and then allowing the big box areas, which are going to be 2 stories height because they're new gyms, so they're ready 2 stories in height, the scale of it, and really have them be in the back area component. The area in yellow are areas to be renovated and upgraded and or converted to a different use. So the auditorium would be totally refurbished in terms of, and really kind of all finishes. It would get air conditioning. It would get, things on the stage, lighting, sound, acoustics, seating as needed, and really have it be a real showcase in terms of just staying within the walls. We're not adding capacity. We're staying within the walls, but we're basically really making that a much more highly functional auditorium. It really is at that time of renewal, and that made sense. And the other significant change is we need to add, when you have this many kids, you need more cafeteria. You need more places for them to have, a cafeteria, multi-purpose, a commons area, and even support for the students. So one of the things we took a look at is taking over what that current media center, that central area, and converting that into that commons area, opening up some of the walls. So you basically have much better circulation in terms of the congestion that you have with some of the circulation, and then building a new media center within the new addition. So that's kind of the swap, as you get new media center relocated within the new construction, as well as the idea of converting that in that central area, because it's right next to the existing cafeteria component with it. The only other classroom that would be added is in the music side is there's a need for really establishing a 3rd large group music room for the orchestra. Right now it's being pressed to service out of a very small classroom, and the idea is to give it its due, so you really have 3 stations, because that's kind of your feeder program. You have orchestra, music, and instrumental things that are happening at the elementary that's coming to a very robust component at the middle schools and feeding the high schools. And so you have a real plus in terms of student interest and desire. So we're trying to give a facility that matches what is actually the demonstrated need for the music component. And I mentioned the other purple, the one that would kind of complete the 2-story loop in the one side, is really adding science labs. And one of the things we discussed in our programming is I said you could have a combination of science classrooms plus science labs, and the science department came back and said, we want more labs. We want as many labs as can fit in that footprint, as opposed to having classrooms, and really kind of giving that hands-on experience. So we're redesigning that to match the program input. And a similar approach to Edison High School is the idea of looking at those additions, and the yellow parts are the renovations. A similar idea that the existing media center would be converted into their 2nd cafeteria commons that would be fed off the corridor, with their keeping the kitchen in the one area. You could have a satellite little kitchen warming area in the new space, but you basically have that capacity happen in the commons. Moving the media center to the front of the school, which is that purple in the front. That would be a 2-story addition in the front component. Also refurbishing the auditorium and stage. It would be very similar to J.P. Stevens. And then it's, as I said, its gain is not only the science labs in the back, but really having that new main gym. And then that frees up some potential for renovating existing spaces, including the very tiny auxiliary gym, and creating 2 real functional PE stations and a large PC station and a dance space. Because we're taking away the dance. The dance is currently in the media center, and so we're moving that. When we take that over for the cafeteria commons, we're moving the dance out of that into a space that would actually function, and it makes sense to have it in that area that includes the large movement classes in the back of the school with that. I glossed over a little bit. In fact, I can go back, because in both high schools, when you have these additions, it's like something has to give. You just can't add the space because you're saying, well, wait a minute, isn't that on top of an existing parking lot? And doesn't that addition touch the existing tennis courts? Yes, it does. So part of the plan is having to do site modifications in a domino component. In both cases, we're looking to propose that the tennis courts are relocated to another area on site. We take over that valuable space for the support for both the additions as well as the kind of revamped parking. And we're also looking to create, since we're now consolidating functions and activities on the PE and athletic side, is to really invest in another area of a turf field to give that kind of 24/7 access and flexibility in terms of the site. So the idea is to relocate tennis as well as create one more turf field that could be multifunctional. It could work for soccer, lacrosse, for other sports in a really concentrated manner for that, because we basically are kind of shifting things and moving things around on the sites to accommodate the circulation. You can see with the grade coming around, the idea is that we now would have complete access around the school with 2 lanes and drop-off, and so the bus pickup and drop-off can be changed. We would have emergency vehicle security and access, which currently is very constricted at that site, but that's something that the new construction can provide. And the same thing really happens at Edison. We're looking to take over the back half where the tennis courts are behind the parking lot and extend it out, with the idea that that can really provide a very long edge for the buses and that component be concentrated there, provide access out to the other side of the street component, as well as then move the tennis courts and relocate them. And then also, in particular, this site has very severe wetlands issues with its fields at the one end, and the idea that here a turf field would actually give great functionality to fields that really are very pitted and kind of can't be used to stay in the same place, but basically we give it a new playing surface next to the existing turf field that's associated with the football and the track and field component with it. So you can see it's the dark area is that new parking lot that would extend up and that circulation. It would have a modified drive in the front because we're adding in the front. So the idea is a drive that kind of loops really deep is just looping in, not quite as deep, but we're still keeping it as back off the street as we can to have it with the component of it. So. And then just to complete the action plans, we're taking a look at what we're proposing for the other 4 schools. This is showing Lincoln School at top, and that's what I was talking about with those fingers of classrooms being added on to, with a circulation corridor and a multi-purpose room being added to the back end. The idea in particular is to expand the circulation with the pickup and drop-off with the buses and give additional parking there. That would really clean up the site that's happening there. And Marshall, you can see the idea is to take where the trailers are, move the trailers out, get that capacity into the building in the purple, and kind of completing a kind of a courtyard loop around with that, as well as then expanding the parking that would happen on that particular site. So that's really a targeted areas. And in particular, this school would have, we're looking to really expand and provide kindergarten rooms there, because right now it has a limited number of the big rooms with the toilets. So the idea is that as it goes to full day kindergarten, the best thing to add on to that school would be these rooms that basically have the self-contained toilets in that wing, and that gives flexibility for how the other classrooms are being assigned for the grades 1 through 5 in the building. So, actually, I think I skipped over. Let me go back to showing this. The top one is the at Adams Middle School, and we literally were at the programming meeting today at Adams, and you can see the back component of the purple on the top of the screen is that 2-story addition that would give a net gain of 6 classrooms, as well as 3 science labs. So taking that, as well as 1 more special space that can work for a music orchestra or some other function for the school. And then the purple in the front is really providing some additional office space, a secured entry, as well as that multi-purpose room station that in order to divide the net number of students that take gym every single period and throughout the school, and really get it down to a manageable number in both the main gym as well as the auxiliary gym. And then below it is Madison Intermediate School, and you can see how that school really is adding another wing. It's completing that loop of a donut of adding. Literally, it's 10 classrooms plus 2 self-contained special education classrooms, so this is a net gain of 12. That's how severely overcrowded this school currently is, between the class sizes as well as the trailers that currently exist, and then also the fact that it has, I don't know if you can see that this is this tiny, very tiny, it's just ancient, from the 50s, multi-purpose room that is totally inadequate for a school that size, and give it a full functioning multi-purpose room with that. And still keeping the McAdam play area and still keeping the other sites. This is a site that has sufficient land that we're able to do this without having real impact on the existing school. And we have ideas in terms of how we can improve the circulation, the idea of how we separate the buses and the cars. On one side of the side, you have some separation between buses and cars, but you don't on the other side. So we're talking about how we can continue that loop of having a separate bus loop versus the car loop. And if we can take the early education needs and parents and kind of operating schedule off the load, that'll really help that school tremendously in terms of just then serving 2 schools as opposed to trying to serve 3 and really having that separate circulation. So that's really the significant part of planning for that campus, which I think works well. And the last thing I just wanted to show you is, okay, what's next? Where do we stand right now? And what are really the next steps that we're involved with? So this is really that big picture, timeline. And literally, this is where we are in terms of this March-April component as we're trying to create these packages that will be going down to the New Jersey Department of Education. We'll also be outreaching to the community. We'll be outreaching to the planning board. We'll be doing, presentations to get the word out in terms of the needs, the priorities, and what's being looked at by the Board of Education. We then have a period where you have submissions in for any kind of action by a Board of Education. There's a couple steps. It's all regulated, highly regulated, and prescriptive, in which you have a process that you have to go to the Department of Education. They're going to want to see an updated master plan. So that was done. So we have the data for that. They want to see the updated master plan. They're going to want to see all the capacity, the demographics that were done, that were updated for that, and they're going to see how you're addressing that. Okay, here the master plan shows great needs. What is your first step with that? And that's what we're really doing, preparing in terms of educational specifications as well as educational justification and rationales for where we're expanding, why we're expanding, and what the capacity is, and what it's going to look like once that is implemented. Once we get the comments and the reviews and what we assume will be approvals from the Department of Education, it comes back to the board for another step. Now, the board right now is acted to basically to allow for submissions to the state, and they have another vote that in terms of once we have the information and the cost estimates that go with it, they'll determine which packages go down. So there'll be a board action that kind of finalizes approval to go down to the Department of Education. Then when the Department of Education speaks, there'll be more board action that happens that it complements that in terms of do we put this out for the public vote. So there's a whole series of decisions and actions that the board has to do in a sequenced manner over the life of this with that. And sprinkled in there, you can see there'll be communications and presentations. One of the things we've been hesitant is while we have really broad-based kind of ballpark, what we call these cost estimate ranges, they were really intended as comparisons. When we compare options, we want to take a look at the sheer number of classrooms, and we're using gross multipliers, and we're using square foot areas, and just kind of being able to come to some conclusions as to which one will be more expensive than the others. It's not a real number yet, because the real number follows kind of the development of the package of what we're in here. Because we have to take that kind of bubble diagram, get it to a real scale. Right now they're not to real scales yet, but we get it to a scale, 16th, 32nd, 1/8 inch scale with the components. Once we have the scale drawings, then we can get accurate square foot areas of that, and then we can basically go with the cost estimation of what it's going to cost for what it is, because we literally have to set the budget early in school construction. You basically have to project out what it is with the things, and you basically have to kind of project even how the market's going to act. So we have to have components of contingency. We might have to have some escalations in there. We have to basically say, since a lot of this bidding is going to happen, not, 1 year, 2 years out, we basically have to put in the cost estimates what we anticipate the market's going to be doing. And that's just a unique factor of schools. It's just the way school referendums are handled in the state of New Jersey. So that's something that we're experienced with, and we'll be bringing in other input of other project managers and other firms that are real experts in that area. Because we always, working with the board, we always say the more eyes on it, the more balances, the more looking at different delivery methodologies and different strategies, the better in terms of getting really cost effective. Because we know we need the space. We also want to deliver it in the most cost-effective manner as we can. And even components in terms of delivery, in terms of, we were talking about some modular off-site construction. How do we impact the school sites the least during this construction? Some of the big spaces, you just need to have the construction fence, and you're going to have the crane and the steel, and you're going to have areas like the gyms that are being built. That has to be done on site. There's no way to cart in, airplane in, a new gym to put it on site. But for classrooms and classroom wings, there are ways to do off-site construction in which the impact in terms of the time, while it takes many months to be done off-site, but then you have finished products that are coming, and so it's much, much shorter in terms of what the construction time is on site. And some of these sites really lend themselves to that kind of strategies for it. It's not so much a cost savings, but it certainly is a big time savings, and it gives you very, very good quality of work, because the work gets done basically off-site within warehouse spaces and sheltered areas. So it's not in the rain and the snow, and it doesn't have a loss of time over the winter and those components. It basically is being done by quality craftsmen, and the district has some experience with that, and I know that's something the board is taking a look at. So we're going to be looking at those kind of strategies as part of it. And that's really what these are the upcoming steps. This is what we're doing right now with the ed specs, the schematics, and the costs are really our next charge. Getting these packages finalized for submission to the Department of Education, coming back to the Board of Education, working with them in terms of those decisions that they have to make. Then we have to line up our presentations to the Planning Board and receive comments and community input. The state wants to see that we've done that we've gotten that input component. And then we need to just share it. We just need to really disseminate this information that you're getting kind of the preview of it. This has to be disseminated out to the public, and so they can really see the magnitude of the needs and the priorities that have been set, and see that makes sense to financially support it in terms of supporting an action plan. And so that's really what we need to do. And then looking at setting a referendum date would be the next thing. And I just put up here, these are like the 4 slots that they have prescribed slots for in terms of when you can have a referendum for a school district. So I just put out, with these upcoming slots, we'd like to target as early as possible if we can, but one of the things we have to do is kind of make sure the board is all in agreement, the community is supportive, and that you have a way to kind of gauge that reaction, as well as kind of make sense of using the date strategically to try and get the most number of supporters out to support it. This is the only way that this goes into any kind of implementation is through public support. So that said, and the numbers are big. We're talking, this is not tens of millions. We're talking, this is really of the magnitude of multiples of tens of millions. This is really going to be a big number. So there will be sticker shock that's happening when we kind of lay out, because those high schools, when you think of it, at J.P. Stevens, we're adding over 40 classrooms. 40 classrooms, the equivalent of a new school. But you have 1,000 kids, 1,000 seats that you need to do. That's why you get to 40 classrooms, is because we're really handling the load of 1,000 students. It's going to be a big number. It's going to be the equivalent of building a new school that's going to be added on to that site. And Edison High School, its net gain of classrooms is about 23, so it's not nearly as dramatic. It has more renovation components in some of its older parts of the building, but it's not going to be as big as J.P. Stevens, but that's, it's still going to be a hefty number of 23 classrooms. It's not insignificant numbers. And then you can see, if we're adding 9 classrooms here, we're adding 10 classrooms here, so those classrooms are going to be adding up to probably plus or minus about 40 classrooms in terms of the other projects. So again, that really is the equivalent of building another elementary school, even though we're building it as pieces at 4 sites and benefiting a lot more students, because we're strategically benefiting 4 schools and not just one site and one group of kids. It still has the cost impact of that from that perspective. And if you ask me what the numbers are, I won't tell you because we don't have them. I don't have real numbers. So I came purposely saying we just looked at kind of estimate ranges and magnitude just to help make strategic decisions. But our next step is to work on those numbers and get that into some sort of order for the board to take action on. That's what I have to say tonight. But I'm here. I'm glad you're here. So I'm glad to hear comments. I have my pad here. I can, take down notes and get input. And let Paul conduct it.
Thank you very much. What an outstanding presentation. 61 minutes. I
know so much about your district.
This really is it's probably the closing. How many here were at the first uploading committee? Get my bad sign. How many were here with the uploading committee? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think the number I originally counted on the sign-in sheet was 80. And that number has certainly dissipated. Okay, but of course the interest and the positive attitude is still here with the few that came. So we have to still reach out to the group that's not here to show them many of the things that they talked about in the different planning meetings are in fact incorporated. And we gave Jean, I think there was something like 6 meetings. I had attended 3, but there were 3 more meetings before I came. So we took all those ideas, Jean reviewed them, and those that were appropriate, we definitely put them right into the project. So people have to feel pleased that their input was heard, and we acted on it. So why don't we open it up? If you have any questions for Jean?
Yes.
Obviously, nothing is going to happen in the school year 2019-2020. Can any of that be implemented in the following school year 2021?
Only just the only thing that's really targeted to happen on the fast track is Wilson School. So that is being fast tracked in terms of having that modular addition within the board prerogative to move forward with that 10 classroom, because that's the one need. So there is one component that is looking to have an impact. The other components of a referendum, because you really need to have major money to move forward at anything at the high schools, is you need to have that public vote. That takes time to get to that public vote. Then typically after the district and the public say yes to funding it, it takes about a year to design, to go out for bidding, to get all the documents done, all the code reviews and all the analysis done, and then it's primarily a 2-year construction. So the reason why we're looking at the earlier of the dates for a referendum is a couple reasons. One, the need is here. It's like, there's no benefit to delaying a vote by the public, and 2, a September referendum in particular really tries to get it so that within that 1 year we try to get some summer work that would happen in that first summer. So if the referendum passes basically in September in 2019, we'd be looking for that summer to at least get some of the interior renovations started. We were targeting packages that could make a use of it. So the idea is that during that construction period, you really use 3 summers in addition to the 2 years of folding the construction into it. So that's really your best bet, and that's really one of the discussions that the board was looking at in terms of when they were looking at dates, is which one is the most friendly or the most beneficial in terms of accelerating getting some work done at the schools. The other thing that we're trying to get the board to really seriously consider is, in addition to capacity, there is an avenue for the board to take a look at some infrastructure improvements that could happen district-wide that really speak to kind of energy-related improvements at the school. So that could pertain to relighting areas. It could pertain to improvements to the unit ventilation. It could pertain to the controls that operate the ventilation and the heating at the schools. Those elements can happen through what's called an energy saving improvement plan. That's not a referendum track line item, because what the state of New Jersey allows schools to do is to go after a special energy saving bond that can finance that kind of work, and where that work is actually paid back through payments of your utility bills at a prescribed rate. And that's work that's governed and kind of authorized not by the Department of Education so much, it's really by the Bureau of Public Utilities. The BPU has a clean energy program, and so it's taking advantage of the clean energy program. And they have some offsets with Smart Start and other components where they basically are giving money because they want to use less energy. They don't want to build more nuclear power plants, so they're trying to encourage entities in terms of the public sector to use less energy, and that's available. So that's something that, again, also can be on a faster track than some of the other improvements that can happen with it.
Your comment, however, on 2 years of construction can be drastically reduced by using a modular system, pre-built outside the area and brought in on trucks, and it cuts the.
Oh, I agree with you. In fact, when I say 2 years of construction, I'm thinking there'll be projects that'll be done within 1 year. There'll be projects that'll be done in 18 months. There'll be projects that'll be done. I'm using the 2 years in the broadest sense of trying to get all the pieces done in addition to it. So I'm saying a 3-year window for all the components. But we would look to have rolling things online sooner than that. And actually, I agree with it in terms of that strategy, is using that as much as possible.
Unfortunately, this school district has dragged their heels for years, and this is so long overdue. Board after board has literally taken no action, and it's a disgrace.
Well, in defense of the board, the one thing that, I'm an educational facility planner. And in this process, I went to every school. I had interviews with all the teachers. I really walked around with the custodians. And there were times when it was overwhelming for me. And this is what I do on a day-to-day business, and I've been in lots of schools. Because of the sheer magnitude, it was really, I now know every single school. They're almost like a child for me. Like I really know the floor plan. I can look at it. I know its problems. I know what it needs. But to have anybody, because everyone here is education. They're not facility. They don't think like an architect, like a planner. So to have somebody, I think that to some degree, they needed someone like me to come in to help sort through all these needs and priorities to give them a direction and a plan. So I think that having that renewal, the wisdom that they had is to say, we need to do a long-range plan renewal anyway. That's a state requirement. Let's do it with an educational component, not just the little website put in, I need a new roof and I need a new floor. They basically said this time we're going to do it with this idea of having, a facility master plan being done at the same time, which is what we kind of specialize and, come in to do. But I got to tell you, there were times when I was totally overwhelmed by, and I almost felt paralyzed in terms of really sorting through it. So it took me, as Paul knows, it took me, I really was kind of living and breathing Edison for 6 weeks of my life to get through it. So not that that's an excuse, but that's really the effort that needed to happen before we get to a place where I can strongly recommend top priorities, high priorities, next year priorities, and long-range priorities. So I'm not justifying anything. I'm just saying that's how long it took me to get my hands wrapped around the need of it. You're absolutely right. It's pent-up need. Wish it had happened sooner. But now we have to just move forward at this point. So, yeah.
It's a great presentation. It's very extensive. Thank you. One step forward. However, I have a few comments on, yes, the capacity is planned, the classrooms are planned, looking at the future growth. But is there any plan in terms of the traffic study, the number of cars that will be moving around, the road expansion, the street signals? Again, it's a matter of moving the traffic around, and you will need a partnership with the township. So is there any line item or any slide that you will prepare? I know it is not to the scale at this point in time, but eventually that will be crucial part in order things to happen.
Yeah, and what we identified in some of the site work, we really have components that need in-depth discussions with the township in terms of how to make this better. How, when we're talking about some of the emergency access and other components that are happening on the site, stormwater management, what's happening with the boundaries. There's a whole series of kind of almost engineering components that have to be the next tier that happens in terms of wetland boundary determinations, looking at some of the soil capacities of it, because we don't want surprises when we're doing the cost estimates now. we may even counsel the board that we have to really kind of look at some areas and have those discussions with the township and doing some engineering components so that we actually have a better handle on what the projection of the cost can be and what can work on the site. One example is that during our preliminary thinking, we were starting to work on the J.P. Stevens, and to our benefit, the board had been looking at some areas of whether they could do some things and had a civil engineer take a look at some of the wetlands, a flood hazard. And lo and behold, what I thought, based on overlays of GIS mapping, looked like, oh, it looks like I can add over here. Turned out that I could not. So having just that next level of information available on those components, and I'm sure the township knows a lot of those components, and that's why I'm saying the outreach to the township is really critical at this point. So I factor that in when I say that public. I am including officials in the public as well to do that, because we have to really firm up just general good thoughts, and a lot of these good thoughts come from. My approach is to be as grassroots as possible, because if I hear about a problem or a need or some critical concern that's coming from multiple sources, whether it's coming from, I heard it from not only the top administrator in a school, principal, but if I was hearing things from the head custodian, if I was hearing things, there were times when we had sessions with the students, in the high school, I was hearing things from the perspective of the students. I was going to the schools during the school day so I could see the pickup or the drop-off, or experience what it was when the bell rang and the classes were passing in there. So that's that broad brush component, and what we have to do is now take that and make this real. For the projects that we're focusing on, we have to take it to that next level of reality and get that component. So this is still broad, but we have to get to there with that other component. Yes.
Thank you very much for coming. Any other questions?
Councilman Doyle, just curious, I heard about urban movement, I like the things you're doing, but as Councilman Basile mentioned, different traffic, the concern I know we had on the council is urban movement, the traffic currently today come down Jackson. Can you recommend or in the future have discussion on any alternative quick fixes? Because right now we have a lot of cars coming down. We have a lot of cars coming down Jackson at a certain time, coming and going during the school hours, drop-offs, pick-up. And then we have buses doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. We have a bunch of streets we could look at to see if we can alleviate traffic. Not that those neighbors will be happy either,
right.
But it just seems to be the brunt of the traffic is on Jackson.
It is.
People park on Jackson at the same time as the whole big block. So would you make recommendations to our limited policing for alternative parking? We just wonder what the quick heal is, because this is a long-term project.
It is, and I have a couple of immediate thoughts, because this is a school in which basically there's only inches to spare in between the front door, the sidewalk, and where the parking is. Plus you have all the turnaround. I mean, it just really is just too jam-packed. It really is so tightly wedged into its current site. So the first thing that we looked at was a way to kind of clean up. Currently the way the kind of the support vehicles come in for kind of the warehouse parts of, in terms of the back areas, that the board has those too. And I'm without my little diagram, I don't remember the name of the street, but it's very narrow and tiny. But we're thinking of whether we could create a one-way loop to get some of the traffic off of Jackson and kind of coming into that. We also looked at the idea of really having a, this is major, but as you kind of point out, if there is any potential expansion, if you're giving up an edge of the board property along Little and making that wider so you can have real two-way traffic there, and having a way to have kind of a circulation loop so you basically have a flow of traffic, that would be something that's a little bit more long-term, but that's something. But just trying to get something that's happening internal to the site, because it really is, it's the most dense circulation I've ever seen, and I know it's just, practically impossible on Jackson in terms of what's happening. Trying to get their access.
The police department, because they have the responsibility for traffic flow, but anything that we do in that area was always in conjunction with the police department.
Yeah.
Was anything sorry to interrupt, but was anything taken into consideration when they built out that multi-union place that's 100 feet from Herbert Hoover?
220 rental units.
220 unit? Because is that 220 more families going down Jackson?
Yep.
Or is there another exit?
But when you have neighbors that complain about something that could have been easy, 30 contractor units 4 years ago, and if we said yes to that, we would have been fine. But when you get 5 neighbors complaining about 30 contractor units, it causes a fuss. That builder goes back later and waits for code to be approved, and then they go back and push housing on us. So we could have collectively got 30 units in 80 vans. Instead, we're going to have 400 cars. So that was pushed over the township.
Nothing was done to go out another way.
Unfortunately, that we're past that point, but I agree with you. And I know that growth is coming too, but for today, the residents who are there want some type of timing change. And it may be an experiment, but there's been no experiment with this same exact thing happening. Down Brower, around the school, up Jackson. And it's challenging when you live there. And so I'm with you, but we're working on looking at Little Avenue, the council and Councilman Patil. We're looking at Little and widening and working with the board. So we're making small opportunities, but then again, it's collectively how it happens. But we definitely are looking at Little Avenue and how it can be a two-way. But even when it all comes together, this is a 5-year plan.
Right.
What happens tomorrow, just to look at ways.
And I think the one thing that the master plan has done is it's identified that there are changes internal to the site that can happen at Hoover, because if we're saying Hoover is going to stay kind of status quo, that we have strategic areas close in that we can add a little bit of expansion, and we even show when we were trying to add in a 5th grade, like you can have some additions that are very close to the building, but that means that the rest of the site can be modified for roads or circulation or ways to get other things happen. It basically reinforces the fact that it may be some internal roadway changes and parking changes that can happen internal to the site that can relieve at least some of the flow or the bottleneck that happens right now at that front of the building that's kind of crazy, and then everything dumping out at the side. So I think that's the things that at least the master plan shows, that this area of the sites can be redeveloped, because we don't need it for building, because we have what we could be a master plan for building in the future. We reserve that, but these are the other areas that can be touched for it. So
we're just happy if traffic is being looked at in some pattern. You're looking at it from a much better view than us. You have more time, but it would be great if the residents got some opportunity to look at relief. May not be perfect, but at least looked at it.
Yeah, and in fact, we try to do that at all the sites in the master plan, is to take a look at that for strategic and trying to be practical and pragmatic about it, and not trying to upset the residents in the areas, but at the same time, when you have an asset nearby that potentially could, for 2 short window periods of the day. And I have to say that when we work in Fort Lee is like the expert in terms of opening things and closing things down. So it's not thoroughfares. It doesn't make big changes to the residents, but they know that during the early morning hours and then, strategic areas, other times, there's some different traffic patterns because there's no other way to get around town. So there may be some things that taking some of those kind of thoughts and strategies in terms of some relief valve that happens during a pickup time and then a dismissal time doesn't impact the residents the rest of the time. Doesn't impact them on weekends. Doesn't impact them during the time that they're coming home or leaving the house, but can help the school during those key operational times. So
I just want to add one thing. The development that she's speaking of has 225 units.
yeah.
So just at a guess, not being a genius in mathematics, it's going to be about 450 cars that are going to come down and out that area. Now, what time they leave, of course, they're not all leaving at the same time, but what
yes.
we definitely
We're gonna have a sign. No. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I just want to make sure you know that's going to be.
Yeah.
That
No.
should hit the map by next year.
Yeah.
January
Yeah.
1st.
No, I that's why that site it makes me the most nervous. It's one of the top things is that for Hoover it really is dealing with the site is really its top priority. I agree.
It was very similar. We added 34 rooms to the middle school. And you can imagine traffic was exceptionally tight. Add 34 more classrooms, and that's 30, probably 40 more cars. We were able to survive after working with the police department.
Yeah.
Looking at the traffic flow.
Yeah.
Challenge, but it took some time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bigger problem. You need to have a lot of people looking at it and a lot of thoughts, and that's, we got to extend that to the traffic and circulation and access. Other questions, comments?
Okay. Dare I say, thank you.
Gene, thank you very much.
Sure, yes, you're welcome.